Welcome to Life-Changing Challengers, the podcast where passion meets purpose. I'm Brad Minus, your host, guiding you through stories of transformation and triumph, from endurance feats to overcoming adversity. Our guests defy the limits and inspire action. Ready to ignite your desire and incinerate your barriers? Join us. Your journey to the extraordinary begins now. And welcome to another episode of Life-Changing Challengers. You guys, we are super lucky. I am telling you, we have Daniel Tausan on the episode with us today, and he is a molecular biologist. He also calls himself a cell biologist, and he's a health and wellness coach. But you want to talk about getting down into the weeds of how science portrays health. And what are the markers? What are the ins and outs of what our bodies go through when we exercise, when we don't, what food does, what it doesn't, what certain nutrients have? I mean, the guy knows it all, and he's been through the ringer. He's also used to be a competitive water polo player and elite coach. So the guy knows the stuff, and I'm really excited to talk to him. So Daniel, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. Still another day in paradise.
Canada.
That's right.
I love it. So, all right, Daniel, can you tell us maybe a little bit about your childhood? Where you grew up, what was the complement of your family, and what was it like to be Daniel as a kid?
Yeah, I definitely didn't get the average, call it, experience, though, if such a thing exists. I would get my mom asking me what I dreamt every single morning. And I thought this was just like the standard parent handbook. You're supposed to ask the kid what he dreams. And I didn't realize that my dreams were that akin of, hallucinations or drug trips that people have later in life, where they're very lucid, very vivid. And I was animals. I would do, all these different things, adventures in my dreams. I would love going to sleep. It didn't take me half a second to fall asleep. And I also had a lot of health problems as a kid. And that's really what pushed me towards kind of the health and wellness side of things, right? To fix my own problems. And then now I can help people fix theirs in return. So I was allergic to everything. Where we're talking, it's springtime and my eyes are like bulging all the time. Just constant, right? If I touch my eyeball, I'm out for the day. Allergic to animals, talk about cats, dogs. I can't get close to them. And so, long story short, I dealt with all of this. I dealt with the gut problems. The gut problems was what drew me. Like, I wanted to be a surgeon. That's what I say when I was 6 years old. I want to cut my stomach open and take the pain out. Like, what's in there that's causing all the pain? And the pain was very simple. It's just not very good idea of what food was. I thought milk and cereal were the breakfast of champions, right? And, that was probably the worst thing I could have been eating. And no one was really around in my circle to point that out or to know how to guide me towards very simple things. Often, anytime you went with a problem, they're like, "Oh, well, you have, IBS, and we can put you on these medications." And Mom was very against all that. So, she put me through tons of different holistic treatments, which, eventually just got to a point where I learned what it meant to be, quote unquote healthy. Like, well, what do you have to do for your gut? What do you have to do for your metabolism? And, it's not that complicated. As a kid, I was a sugar junkie. It's that simple. You're just addicted to sugar, like people are addicted to crack. It's the same neuroimaging can be seen on cocaine as it is with sugar. And I loved sugar, right? So I would have a bag of M&Ms. I would go through the entire bag of M&Ms. I want to get the stomachache right away. But the next day, I'm out, right? And the route was to be a doctor. I'll have to go be a surgeon, be a doctor. But I'm a space cadet. My dreams are just a reflection that I'm really daydreaming in the waking state more than I'm present with the rest of us. And so even though I have this jock-like exterior, I'm a Muslim man and all that kind of good stuff, people would think this guy must be cocky or whatnot. And they start talking to me like, "Oh, you're out. What planet are you from, buddy? Are you even in the right time?" And like Huberman, I can't help but just start saying things to people. "Oh, you could do this to help you lose weight. Oh, you're in your 50s. You should probably really consider resistance training because your bone mass is about to go real quick the next 10 years unless you start doing something about it." And, I had to learn through life that's not welcome all the time. You can't just say these things to people you are emotionally ready. I have to understand everyone's on their own journey. And so I really didn't like where medicine and call it like our biotech is today when you work for biotech, it's a lot of, you can't deliver what's really there because the market's not ready for it. So you're playing this game of trying to like upsell what you have in a way in which isn't right. And you can't even communicate what you have because what you have could be exciting, but it's too hard to even to bridge to the audience. The jargon's also just part of a little bit of the jargon. It's just part so you can have the conversation. We're talking about endurance training. Like you need to know a little bit about how your body metabolizes oxygen, sugars, and fats. If you don't, you just can't have the conversation. And the conversation is cool, right? That's what existence is based on. It's based upon that's what we have to work with. You can't ignore it. Either you learn it or you let someone else do it and tell you how to leverage it. And so this desire, this curiosity has just kept me hungry for knowing what is it to be a human being? What is our potential? And, just like the cold exposure and what we know from hypothermia, our textbooks need to be rewritten. Right? Like what I learned in my textbook, I myself already could physically override with my control over the autonomic nervous system. But this isn't new to the world. The jet fighter pilots, deep sea free divers, pregnancy for women. Like we all use a breathing technique in order to be able to hijack your physiology, in order to be able to withstand unbelievable feats. So why isn't this, incorporated into our understanding of physiology? How come this part is left out when you're training a doctor or even when you're training a scientist? And, that's the part where I didn't really fit in with the rest of, call it the crowd there. Cause today, if you want to be your standard scientist and get a job as a scientist, your best bet is to model disease. I just wasn't into it. Yes, you can go down the sports route and whatnot, but then you're also very much so capped at what you're supposed to be looking at. Right? How dare you talk about health? You just stick to the performance side of things. And I like educating, I like talking about what's there. And so, a lot of people are the outlier. Like you'll get some data and you don't fit the trend. You can't just toss that person away. And I will help make sense of you as the outlier because that's real biology, right? I can go sit in the lab and curate data, but in the real world, I got to address the fact that you exist and that biology is real. It's meaningful. It's telling me something and I'm up for the challenge, so here I am.
And that is a great, that's a great, almost agenda that we should follow what you just said. But I want to step back a little bit. I want to know a little bit more about you. So just a basic question. Brothers, sisters?
Older brother.
Were you close?
Very close. Yeah. We wrestled. I would jump from the top of the stairs in wrestling style, like Rey Mysterio Jr. That's the kind of brother I had. And, sometimes he'd catch me and sometimes he'd move and I'd slam into the closet, but, I love him regardless.
Oh my God. That's awesome. I didn't have any brothers and sisters. I don't know about that. I had 12 cousins, so I got a little bit of it, but oh man, that's great. So when you were they call it high school in Canada, right? It's not secondary school. Okay. So in high school, is that when you started water polo?
Yeah, I started water polo when I was 11. Yeah, pretty young.
Oh, wow.
That my biggest, feat in life so far is I taught myself to swim at age 4. I just walked into the ocean. I saw everyone else and they said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Leave me alone. I have to go learn how to swim in the deep end." And I just started doing the thing, so I'm an aquatic kid and that's where I feel the most comfort is near water.
Oh, that I envy. I've been through, I got a total amount, probably somewhere around the 100 mark for triathlons. And yeah, it's still all right, survived the swim. So I have the privilege to get on my bike, but I'm getting there. It's good enough to get on the podium once in a great while.
For swimming, if you don't do it when you're young, it is extremely, if not yet impossible. So a 17-year-old can decide, hey, I want to be a world-renowned soccer player. They can still make it at the upper echelon. A 17-year-old that doesn't have an aquatic background will never break into any kind of national, even world championship. No chance. So don't feel bad. That's all.
Yeah. I mean, so just for everybody listening, and I'm not ready, but hey, there are exceptions. Lionel Sanders, very much an exception. Canadian triathlete, never swam as a kid, started working on the water, but he worked really hard to get to that point. And now he'll swim in the front of the pack. He'll never be in the front. So that kind of still leads to your argument, but he does. But again, like you said, you could be 20, 23, 24, and you can get on a bike.
Yeah.
And you could get upper echelon. You could go straight and get upper echelon. If you've got a little bit of genes and a lot of persistence, you can get there. But you're right. Swimming, it's tough if you didn't start when you were a kid. But that's amazing. So did you play water polo through high school, and did you play for college too?
Yeah, so I played up until I was 20 and I played for Team Canada. So there's no college, so to speak.
Cool.
Pretty much from the high school, you're going to the training center, which was in Calgary at the time. And you just start practicing with the mix of what's there, the national team. And in 2008, when Canada made it to the Olympics, I got to train against a team that got to go. So maybe if there was 2 or 3 injuries, I would have been, on the bench warming it or being in there. But yeah, that's as far as I pushed it. But, being a Canadian athlete is pretty tough, right? Like there's not that much glory, support, or even future in it. And so I very quickly decided like, no, I want to go pursue that dream of being the doctor or science or whatever it was at the time. Just go get smarter, so to speak.
So you mentioned your gastrointestinal allergies, and the whole bit, and that's why you decided to take up. Did you start out? You just started out with basic biology, and then you moved and you started to drill down into what molecular biology stem cell.
Yeah. So initially it was like, hey, what do I have to do to become a doctor? And then you get a chance to talk to people and whatnot. So I had a chance to shadow a bunch of doctors, and I was put off almost instantly. The first gentleman, I don't think he was a human being. He was a saint. When I shadowed him, he was awake for like 40-something hours. He had like an hour nap. He had some insane shift, and he had multiple roles in the hospital. An absolute godsend. Like this is like when you meet someone that's a doctor, he's going to be like 1 in 50, but that's the person you're hoping takes care of you. And the next 2 weren't that great. They said wrong things. And like in third year biology, I could figure out you're saying things that are wrong. That's not good. And, one of them was bragging how he got a person back onto insulin. Just felt very wrong on so many levels. Right. It's like a businessman in a coat pretending to be a doctor who's just happy to sign off on things, which obviously it's not all of them, but I did get to meet that person. And then I just saw how the day looks like. It's very quick interactions with people and then a whole boatload of paperwork. And you play this game of liability and red tape, and you're kind of helping, you're kind of not. And I understood the medical system a lot better then because, if you're not a good patient, like it's pretty hard for a doctor. I don't think people realize how impossible it is in today's day where the doctor doesn't know what you ordered. You could order a package from anywhere and expose yourself to God knows how many different chemicals, right? Like there has never been a civilization in history exposed to more molecules of various sorts than we are today. Plus we can synthesize ones which can be very weird for the body that you can't metabolize, like trans fats, for example. So, the fact that you go to a doctor, you're like, hey doc, I'm not feeling well, this is my problem. I get it. He's there just to stabilize you and get you out of the door. He's not there to teach you how to live or change your lifestyle or go do this detective work to figure out where you could have been. There's like that show House deludes people into thinking that that's the medical system is going to do. If people remember that, right? Like, so absolutely not that. So that put me off right away. And one of the doctors said, I don't think you'd be a very good doctor. You ask way too many questions. I love talking to hear about you. I'm excited. You're probably better off in being like back-end research. Because like, I would love for you to come and bring this information to me years down the line. And I took that to heart. I was like, okay, yeah, maybe. And the moment I went into volunteering and being part of the research crowd, I was at home. I was with the nerds. I get to ask the questions and I get to be left alone with microscopes and tools in which I can then explore things and make my own observations and guesses. And so I looked towards a stem cell biology lab and I started working there to do the doctorate. And I loved it. I spent a lot of time looking at a mouse model in which looks at mesenchymal stem cells. And I looked at how the liver regenerates. And I helped my mentor who taught me how to be a scientist in the lab. He's doing his doctorate on muscle damage. So I would help him with everything that he was doing. And so I got to understand how the body regenerates and through the connective tissue in particular and mesenchymal stem cells. But lab work and animal work and that kind of stuff, I need to be interacting with people. So I switched out and I started doing the molecular profiling of exercise. So in the stem cell biology, what I was working on is taking a look at a lot of information. It's called the transcriptome. You get DNA, you make a message to make a protein. So it's looking at that message, but you don't just look at one message at a time. You look at, as many as you can capture. So within a mouse, it's about 20,000. And so you look at about 20,000 messages you can capture. And I want to know what messages are being turned on when you're undergoing regeneration. And specifically, you isolate the mesenchymal stem cells to see what is this stem cell doing in order to help you regenerate? And, the more you learn about it, the more you can leverage your understanding. But what about just getting that on people's blood? because I don't, I'm not going to get your liver biopsy anytime soon, right? I don't want your piece of your heart. Let's keep that to you. Your liver, no problem, but heart, lung, I don't want that either, right? Let's make sure it stays on you. Those organs can't regenerate. Whereas muscle, no problem. Give me some muscle. Sure, it hurts. It's a little bit obnoxious, but your muscle heals phenomenally. I was interested. Can I bring this understanding of molecular biology to the person, like the actual person? And I was lucky to work with a company, Molecular You, through the doctorate. When COVID came, I stopped the doctorate and I started working with people. I did the thing you're not supposed to do. I started caring about the person, right? Instead of the data and the work. And I've been freelance since. I've started my own venture and I act as a bridge. There's plenty of science available and I'm happy to do the heavy duty science side where I connect you to it. Whether you bring me a blood test or molecular data and be like, hey, interpret this for me. Whether it's, hey, I have some blood variables. Can you make a scoring method for me? To, hey, I just want to get healthy. I have none of these biomarkers. What do I do? And I still like that part. I still like telling people the base physiology in which very few people know. And the funny thing is, it's just not taught. And so I do. I run my own educational series when people are like, well, I want to get back to health. Really what they need is they need a little bit of nudge in the right direction, a little bit of dissolving their beliefs, because the beliefs are what's causing the problem. And then a point to be like, hey, well, here's your physiology. Did you forget about how the liver functions? Did you forget about what your blood needs? Did you forget about, like moving your body at the right time? The things that are super important for your health are mostly free. And that's why they're not talked about very much.
Right. I mean, they've got us cornered, but no, I am fascinated about the why. And I have some of my clients that are like, yo, coach, just tell me what to do. I'll do it. I trust you to get the results and we'll go from there. But because I'm always telling them, you know what, you're just going to have to humor me because this is what I do. And I'm very big on it. And I always say, listen, if a coach can't tell you why you're doing a specific workout, he's not a very good coach. So when I'm talking about, them being on the bike for 45 minutes and doing certain intervals, I'm sitting there going, okay, this is a tempo workout for this specific thing. We want to get your legs and your body used to going at this speed. And then we bring it back down to give yourself some recovery and put it back up again. And this gets things going. And then the next day, it's a steady, it becomes steady bike or a steady run or get in the pool and it's steady. And I said, it's steady to clear out the lactic acid, let it run through your body and recreate the energy level. Well, there might be more to it, which I would love to hear about. Yeah, for sure. But that's the whole idea is that I'm always about that. I'm like, this is why. And I tell them why. This is your objective. These are your metrics. This is why you're doing it. We have a threshold heart rate of this, and we want to be above threshold for a while, and we want to be below threshold for a while. And this will help out with metabolism. It will get you to the point where we're at a certain level of your plan so that we can get to a certain speed so that by the time we get to the end of the plan, you're ready to go for your race. But people are like...
Yeah, so let me ask this from your experience in that, is it the same principle of training, or let's maybe not principle, but is it the same time course that every single athlete is going to take? Or do you come with your experience and be like, hey, I want you to push a little more. Okay, you don't need as much recovery. Hey, you know what? You need way more recovery. You get to, okay, I see you nodding your head.
Absolutely.
Can you share a little bit here? Because I'm happy to interject, but I think, because that part is a little bit understated from the coaching side, because coaching, I say, is an impossible job.
It's tough because of the personalities, right? So I use a SaaS program. SaaS is, software as a service program called Training Peaks. And I always make sure that everybody has to have a Garmin. And if they don't have a heart rate monitor on the Garmin, then they've got to wear a chest strap. And I know that the optical one is not as complex. Yeah. It's not as accurate or precise, but the delta is usually really close. So if I do the test, if I'm doing GXT tests, where we're doing graded exercise tests to get to their zones, if I do it on the watch, then their delta will be the same. That part works out, right? But if I use a chest strap, it'll be much more precise. Mm-hmm. Using that, and then when they go through each one of their workouts, it graphs it, and it will, using heart rate variability and heart rate itself, resting heart rate, RMR, it actually graphs it. So I can actually tell when fatigue is high and form is low, but fitness is improving. So I'm very deliberate I'm constantly looking at it. So if they've got a really hard workout and I see their fatigue spike, I'll usually call them and say, hey, listen, we're going to just bring down tomorrow, or I'm going to swip this with an easier workout tomorrow. And then we'll go back to work the next day because you spiked something here. I also make sure that most of them are being diligent on their recording of their diet. I don't care what you eat for now, but definitely you want to journal it. And then all those nutrients, MyFitnessPal will then also goes into Training Peaks. It integrates. So I can see what their macronutrients are. So obviously, as you would know, is that if they go out and they do a 10-mile run and they kill it, everything's great. And then all of a sudden, a few weeks later, they do it and they're like, "Ooh, I'm a little more fatigued than I was last time." And everything else looks fine. Like, their fitness level, everything is fine. Then I can at least go into and go, okay, well, wait a second. Yeah. Well, the day before you did the last 10-mile run, you were at 65%, carbohydrates. And the night before last time you were at, the day before last time, you were only at 40% carbohydrates. There must be something there for that person. Sometimes it's fat. I got some people that like to be more aesthetic. Like I've got one woman that we were doing a 4-day challenge. So she did a 5K on Thursday, 10K on Saturday, half marathon on Saturday, and then a full marathon on Sunday. So Thursday 5K, Friday 10K, Saturday half marathon, Sunday marathon. 48.9 miles, 4 days, and it goes it's down here in Tampa, just a couple miles away in Disney World. So you run around the parks and the whole bit, but it's all for these races. And so I said, what we're going to do, let's see, if you're really that way, let's try you on keto. And I did this like 3 months out. And then we had her train. 2 days before your race, we're going to start adding carbs back in. We're going to add a boatload of carbs 2 days before, another good amount of carbs 1 day before, and then we're going to maintain until Saturday. It's not going to matter on Sunday, but to top them off. And she killed it. She absolutely blew it out of the water, like literally PR'd every race. But then Monday, she goes, yeah, it was a great time and all, but I looked in the mirror today and I don't like what I see, and I'm like, really?
Loaded water.
I'm like, great. So I'm like, go back onto a regular diet. You don't have to go completely keto, but let's pull your carbs down just a little bit. Call me on Thursday and tell me you feel the same way. She called me on Thursday. She goes, yeah, you're right. That's the reason you're the coach. She goes, no, I look good. So that's one of my kids that she doesn't like to be told why.
Right. It helps sometimes knowing why so that you can, I think, make the association with, hey, what's going on at the moment. That's why it's important to have a social circle, a community. You delegate responsibility, who's to know what, so that you're not worried about having to know everything,
Exactly.
I think one important thing for endurance in terms of just understanding the physiology of it is that you would like your body to spare glycogen and sugar as much as possible. It's not because of the energy aspect of it, it's because how those resources are tied in with your hormonal system and how much they act as a fatigue or a break on the body. And it's not a real fatigue or break. It's a safeguard that the body has. And if you can't practice into it, which we don't because it's usually within the performance time or the very uncomfortable, glycogen depletion and glucose depletion puts us at oh my God, I can't go anymore. But as you keep training, especially when you train in fasted states, when you train in states where you haven't ingested very much glucose and you have to convert it yourself, you have to produce your own glucose, your body becomes very good at sparing the glucose. And it actually shifts what the oxidative capacity of the muscle fibers that like fats. So even your oxidative, the slow twitch fibers, well, they can still use glucose. And once they get to a certain threshold, they'll consume glucose as well. And there's a threshold when you activate the fast twitch fibers. And so, this is something I'm always fascinated in because some people, no matter what they're really doing, are very good at adapting themselves to both what's called the fat metabolism and to what's referred to as keto metabolism, right? So your muscles don't use ketones as a fuel, but you can get them to. And so this is where my bias or my kind of outlook for this training, especially this hybridized way of being strength endurance, where your body doesn't really want to do both. It's the most grueling of the type. And I know this very well because in water polo is a very good example of where you need strength endurance in a very weird way because you're in water too. And so you have someone who's trying to drown you. You have to be very strong. You have to sprint up the pool because if you can sprint and beat him up the pool, you already win because the other guy will just muscle you out. So this notion, especially within the water, you get very, very good at strength endurance sports. So much so is that when you transfer to something else like jiu-jitsu or mixed martial arts, you're like a freak in comparison to everyone else because you've built out a system that's very good at using your energy resources at really good rates, let's call them. And so your muscle fibers are adapted very much so to both endurance, meaning you can function on, call it, very little air for a long time, where other guys, just a few seconds in, they're huffing and puffing. And you've adapted your blood chemistry so that ketones are easier to be in circulation. And so this is some of the stuff I've seen in conjunction with, the performer, the athletes and their blood results. And as people are going over longer periods of time with me, is that the more that they practice a principle of metabolic flexibility, in which their diet, their lifestyle has it so that every single day they're going into a state of producing ketones. This is where now the tie-in with longevity comes in. What I'd say is that I don't care for longevity, but I realize that if you understand the principles of longevity, those are the same as the principles of health. They're not different. Mm-hmm. Only call it separation is that if you really want to talk about pushing the last 10, 20 years, you're going to do stuff very differently. But this idea of health and what that means for understanding predictively is the same for longevity. Now, the funny thing is athletes actually die sooner than most people think. And that's because they adapt their cells. So the muscle fiber is great. The blood looks good. And lots of stuff is on the cellular level adapted to such an extent where it could last a lot longer. And that's one part of longevity. It's how long will the cell live? How good is your cell? And sometimes the athlete doesn't do a great job where after they stop being an athlete, they'll start burning through their cells very quickly because they try and live a certain lifestyle similar to before. But now they've adapted the cell very great and they don't do a detraining process. You can imagine the blood pressure can be maintained incredibly high with an athlete. And later in life, you can still send the pressure, but the vessels can't hold that pressure anymore. And so they rupture in birth. And so you often see athletes die or ex-athletes of like a cardiovascular event or a stroke. And so there's a two-part for longevity. There's this, can the cell make it? And what are the physiological correspondence? How's the physiology doing? Right? The cells got to work together in order to give you a function. And it's this functional component that has to continue for you actually to survive. And so you need both in order to have longevity. And for some, their cells are absolutely crippled. They look like they should be dead God knows how long ago. But for whatever reason they're able to coordinate still and work, And so I'm always kind of looking at what is the best predictive value. But there is a very, I call it fortunate or unfortunate, whatever side you want to be on, inter-individual variability. There's just so much variation. Even what we understand is a standard blood test. That's why there's a range. And sometimes you're on like the edge of the range. And athletes often are outside of those ranges and the doctor needs to know. And if the doctor is not, call it, equipped to understand what an athletic blood value should be, they get misdiagnosed or misinterpreted very easily. So this idea is, great if you're looking like, hey, I need more work in biology. It's great. It's complex enough where there's always more stuff to do. But it makes it a little bit difficult in terms of having confidence all the time with what everything's telling you. This is why there is no better comparison than yourself. You are your best control. And the sooner you get interested in yourself, the sooner you have access to wealth in which I can't give you monetary value for because I don't know what treatment or let's say other thing you're going to buy into later life, in which I'll tell you now, people that have lost their health, they'll give all their money to get their health back. They're dumping it by the thousands. And so, for me, this sort of look on the inside, it's cool that you have heart rate monitors and this data, which at times I sometimes wonder from the coaching side, do we like overvalue the data? But I really got interested more of what's happening on the inside because I personally trained, once I stopped being a water polo athlete, I helped my brother with his personal training company at the time. And I had a client have a stroke with me and he was super healthy, right? And his nickname was 007. just a stud of an older gentleman. And he liked his red wine, but he didn't abuse alcohol or anything like that. And I had no way of guessing that he'd have a stroke component. And, I guarantee it that if he got a blood panel like what's available today, that I would have known. And I would have changed drastically the way I approached training him. And I would have been super careful to reinforce his blood vessels. And when you say, well, we need to train so that your blood vessels can handle pressure. We need to train so that your blood has no worry for clotting. And what does that look like? What does that mean? But if you have the blood values, if you have 2 markers, no good. But if you have 100, that gives you a very, very good insight as to where your health might be trending toward. And there is no test on the market that'll give you everything, but there are tests on the market that give you a massive leg up because about 70% of your blood is your liver, excluding the cells, excluding the red and white blood cells. It's about 60 or 70% of it's your liver. So understanding that really, the more you understand how to help and support the liver, which is everyone's best friend, it's at your right side, right underneath your ribs. You just give that little appreciation. It's constantly taking grenades for you. Everything you do, the liver takes the grenade. You make a mistake where, for the longest time, we had the pool time for water polo at very late at night. So my biggest meal would be at 11 o'clock at night. That's not good. It's not good for college, just basic physiology. But as a kid, that's your option. You either get the food in at the right time or just get the food in. And so I didn't get it in at the right time, and I would always have a messed up circadian rhythm as a result. And that's fine for when you're a kid, but even early on in my 20s, I then suffered the consequences of it. And I took some years, took some unlearning. It took, funny enough, very deliberate works. One guy I would point towards, his name is Michael Kogan. So I read all his books, and I said, this guy is about 30 years ahead of his time. He's born in the wrong era. And everything that he put forward not only stood the test of time today with all the advances and all the research that came to, but, it's still something I rely on in terms of, hey, you know what? If he noticed 30 years ago, what information did he use? And the physiology didn't change. The genetics didn't change. So, maintain the basics, even though the fashions and science constantly change, right? Eggs are good, eggs are bad, eggs are good, eggs are bad, cholesterol's good. The fashions in health always change, but the underlying physiology doesn't. And that's something I'm really interested in, because to me, it's fascinating, this idea of, okay, metabolic flexibility, producing ketones. That's one thing I can tell you about. But when the ketones are produced, that's an entire other biological pathway that's turned on, in which turns on other things in which also come as a result. And so your genetics, you're dealt. There's no point in hammering or hampering on about your genetics. The tests are usually very fun, but not that useful for what you should be doing in life. Whereas you must, as soon as possible, start learning to master your metabolism, because you're responsible. You're responsible for setting metabolism every single day. And if your coach tells you, hey, you try and go keto, that's very open for what you can still eat. It's just telling you restrict carbohydrates. Because even if you're trying to eat keto, but you're having difficulty digesting your food, all right, it's going to be shit. Your performance will be garbage. But if you eat carbs and you digest them, no problem, but you want to be able to train yourself to be able to do these endurance style races, you got to figure out how you're going to get to supporting your digestion better. It's funny enough, it's something where people start ignoring very often, where it's like, oh, well, someone told me avocados and eggs are great, but the guy eats it every morning and feels like there's a rock in his stomach. Well, it's like, well, you're really punishing the amount of enzymes you're asking your body to make. You're super high fat, super high protein. That's great, buddy, but we can't keep that up for a long time. You're going to get a dysbiosis. And all of a sudden, this guy who's listening to all these health tips is in the hospital because his stomach is just causing him an immense amount of pain. Okay, you got to slow down with what you're doing. So even the things in which we think are healthy, we're still learning about. It's like, wait a minute, what's the biology that faltered here? And how do I do it? How do I better understand it? How do I better approach it? And digestion is something that's, funny enough, I haven't heard ever in my athletic career, but it's been more and more what I actually bring forward as an athlete. Says, hey, how do you feel when you eat a certain meal? Okay, well, try it again, but this time you're going to add either the cumin, the fenugreeks. You're going to change up the preparation. You're either going to slow cook your meat for 8 hours before you eat it. Put way more peppercorns, things like this. How are you preparing your food? And then all of a sudden, man, now all the things I was eating before, way different. You know, like I love my food. I'm not feeling like lethargic and whatnot. And, you know, a lot of times to kick wheat, you got to kick wheat to the curb, even though we love wheat. Wheat's often called not the best thing, right? And I guess another one is that there's this myth somewhere within athletics where it's like eat a bunch of pasta. Like pasta's your best friend. But pasta's okay, especially if you have like good fresh pasta. That's a different story.
Right.
This idea that, you know, pasta is your best carb source. No, it's slow to digest. It'll make you feel lethargic. And like, yes, there's always going to be a guy in the team that can eat an insane amount of pasta, still be okay, but that's not everybody. And that's a big part where, you know, your biofeedback, like you have on the heart rate monitor, that's great. But your sensations of like, hey, I'm comfortable, I'm uncomfortable, that's the most useful. You know, that's also the leading edge where it tells scientists, like, maybe I could develop a product that will tell people, like, you know, without subjectivity, that this is it. And so this is a big part where, you know, from longevity, I'll throw this at you to see what you think, but the temperament for all the people that I've got to interview personally that are centurions, made it to 100, is they're fun. Like, they're fun people. Their mood, their temperament is, you know, you can't really get on their nerves. If you say something that they think is disrespectful or rude, they'll just call you out. They'll try to be cheeky. They'll try to make you laugh very often. They don't take things to like too much personal. And it's not like they don't get angry in life when you ask them, like, oh, when's the last time you're angry? They're very much so in tune with the real biofeedback. The not your beliefs, the things that you said. Oh, someone told me to eat almonds. I must eat almonds now. They're good for me. The almonds are good. And yet, you know, the person is suggesting more oxalates than they ever did in, you know, the last 30 years, just because someone told them, you know, almonds are a good protein source or a fat source and they got to eat or vitamin E or whatever. So this notion of mood and temperament is also tied in with this idea of feeling, because, you know, they're very good. They're very apt to be able to respond to what's in front of them, you know? So I guess that's like a long-winded way to give you a whole boatload of where do we take it, right? It's the complexity we're dealing with. And the fact is, a coach, you have to be blind and be like, do this. When you're right as a coach, I have to say it's a sensational feeling, because the amount of guesswork that you take, obviously the supercomputer in the brain does a lot of quality stuff. Otherwise you wouldn't be where you're at. But it's such a hard, especially when you have athletes that are good at slacking. You know what I mean? Like when they can lie to you very well and they're lying to themselves, but like to cheat themselves. And so you have to figure out, like, how am I going to play this game of psychology with them? And so you're not even dealing with sport at this time. You're dealing like a whole different ball game too.
You got to be a coach. You're a therapist. You're a friend. You're a brother. You're a father. You know, you're certain people that react in a certain way. You know, like I've had somebody that's strictly as I can give them a little bit of information and tell them what they need to do. And they're very, very happy. Right. The woman that I said, you know, let's try keto for a few weeks and then we're going to come off of it for the race. Right. So I find that pasta is good for a major event. No pasta throughout it. But then when we're starting to use the old term of carb load, just to pack the glycogen stores, then we'll add that in 3-4 days before the race. I'm not talking about like 20-year-old water polo athlete pasta. I'm talking about a normal side of pasta and as fresh as possible. But then we cut it out. And then after the race, you're done. We leave it alone, because what you said exactly is that slow digestion. So when you're on the run, it's still digesting. You're still getting the glucose out of it, in my opinion. And it seems to work. I am not a big fan of a normal runner. They're always telling me like, yeah, before a race, same thing. Bagel, peanut butter, banana, and coffee. And I'm like, yeah, it's either not enough. And then I'm trying to tell them, you got to be there at least 2.5, 3 hours beforehand if you're going to pack that kind of stuff in. And they're like, no, I do it 45 minutes before. But you're not getting anything out of it. What you're getting is the night before, and what I've seen. But let's talk about some of these myths, you know, that we come up with, right? So what you've told me right now just got me thinking, because you talked about using ketones, getting your body in ketosis, and that you can train your body to be, what do you call it? Glucose barreling. How long is somebody working in ketosis before their body can actually start using that? When do they start feeling that? Does it take a month, 2 months? Obviously, there's going to be a range because everybody's different.
Well, great point. Yeah, I mean, when you take a look at the literature in science, right, you take a cohort of people, you might put them on a bike, you ask them to change their diet, you take a muscle biopsy and you see, does the enzymatic machinery on the muscle change in a due time? So within about a month to 3 months, you can see that the muscle has adapted to be able to use X amount, some small amount of ketones as a energy resource. You can see the upregulation of the enzyme present there. And so that would give you a little bit of confidence with, okay, muscle's pulling in ketones. So in this notion where, hey, I'm giving my body another access to not only are there fatty acids, so fats present that I can pull into the muscle to use, which is the primary, of the slow twitch, what they're going to use. The ketones are a additional fast access fat, so to speak, where the way you go into burning, we don't really burn things. We oxidize our food in order to be able to extract energy. It's just a shorter step into oxidation for the energy, whereas the fat has to go through a slow process called beta oxidation. So you chop it up and you have access it for energy. It really depends on the individual and their background, because, we kind of think people are born in these different kind of body types. It's not necessarily. It's really like if you're chasing aesthetics, you should really just chase a biomechanics, and the aesthetics come as a consequence. If you're focusing on aesthetics, you're doing things you don't want to do necessarily. It's always a motivation game, and then you're always kind of on the back foot. Whereas, hey, my goal is a certain movement, like a handstand or whatnot, then aesthetics start following, because in order to do a handstand, you have to have certain alignment and posture with your skeleton. Therefore, it gets that muscle development to a certain amount. You put a time trial, like, hey, I want to get my 1 kilometer run under a certain time. Your body's going to change in accordance to that. You could take a look at what physique do you like. Okay, what athlete emulates that physique? Go play that sport. You'll get there faster, and obviously you can use gym as a supplement. So this idea of how to adapt your metabolism, it really goes into this notion of what did you put into your body? And, I've seen from high level endurance athletes that, the meal beforehand has very little to do with energy. It has everything to do with comfort and psychology.
Yep.
So like the energy that you're going to be using for the race, especially for endurance, it is already kind of preset, meaning that you can load your liver with glycogen, but there's a certain enzymatic rate in which you're going to access that stores, and there's a certain threshold at which your body's capable to operate for long periods of time. So, you eating whatever you're kind of considering as like the best outcomes, sure, free workout, it has a lot more to do with a psychological edge. So, hey, I feel good eating peanut butter. Therefore, it really doesn't matter, because me feeling good is more important, because that psychological component is what keeps me in a state of I'm happy, I'm coping, with whatever it is that I've gotten to. But there is a better and worse for sure. And so, the notion I think I would stress here more so than anything else is that it's always good to, whatever it is, the idea, we're like, hey, I'm going to load pasta or I'm going to do carb load or whatnot, is to always do a mock, more difficult trial version of the event than the actual event itself, to see how you respond to changing nutritional conditions. Because what's most important for an athlete, especially one that's in constant performance, is something that they can guarantee be okay with, especially when, your performance is tied to your paycheck. You don't necessarily want to be throwing in these curveballs and testing things. You want to test it when you're comfortable, where you can fail. You'd be like, oh, I'm flatlining. That's okay. I made the leverage in its space. And so this is where I'll point towards, we have bodybuilders and weightlifters that, for example, are in a 7-day fasted, and they do a personal best in a deadlift because they prepare themselves for that. Like 7 days without food, yet they're able to exert their personal best in deadlifts. And we're talking deadlifts in the 600-700, pounds. It's not like a small deadlift that they're lifting. So, this type of physiology, I would say, is not like the extreme. It's just an example when someone has prepared and set themselves up so that they gain access to their body. Because, you can put lots of mental roadblocks for yourself, but that's tied in with a physicality too. Your belief system does control your hormones. You think you see a snake and you get scared, oxytocin goes up, cortisol goes up, cholesterol goes up, heart rate goes up, but there's a physical consequence to you thinking that there's a snake, even though there's nothing there. That's even just a perception. So in the same way, when you have a belief where, I won't perform well if I'm in a ketosis, you won't, because you've already set the stage in which you're going to have a certain hormonal cascade, certain neurological control, in which is already working against you. And the more you hear from today, from even celebrities or big names that had massive problems, and they say, oh, I always talk bad about myself. I always talk down to myself. I always had this negative self-dialogue, and it would destroy my performance. It would ruin my marriages. It would ruin my relationships. And I realized that I was having 20 years of negative self-talk. Well, that's a part of a belief system, that the person isn't deserving of something or the person isn't worthwhile. And, this is why when you talk to the best, they'll say, like, well, I saw it, I visualized it, and I acted on it, and they're not delusional. It's not like, well, I just sat around playing games and walking my dog. And then the next day I woke up and I won, gold medal at a national championship. No, there's obviously a level in which they know their abilities, they know their competition, they know what they can see with the mind's eye. And this is something that I'm personally always I quest to better understand, because I feel the science to me comes pretty easily, but the part where it's difficult is this emotional portion in which that there is massive play for the human being. You can feel it viscerally. You can't always measure it so quick. These fleeting emotions that come in, which really dictate, I think, a person's health more so than we can give it credit for. I talked to a lady and she told me that she lost her voice for a few years. I was like, wow, that's bizarre. She's like, yeah, when I lost my voice, I really went my own way. I opened my own business. I did my own entrepreneur way. I started changing my entire life. And that's a very different way to heal your voice, where she stopped doing this busy runaround. She took a lot of effort to take things into her own hands. And as she started doing a lot more things for herself, rather than just, working for others, her voice started coming back. That's a bizarre state, but almost every condition in which people experience, I see is almost tied to some kind of, call it physiological. It's like a slap from the universe saying, hey, you need to pay attention to this in order for you to be able to align yourself with what you want to be doing. Right? It's almost as if you came here to do something, right? I think everything has got some level of meaning, right? Our mechanic, they're meaningful because they help you be able to traverse the world, and you all got to get from point A to point B. From yourself, who's coaching, bringing up even the smallest thing where, I'm sure a lot of the athletes, they could do it on their own, but they'll never do it on their own if you weren't there, right? Because it's so much easier when you have a pillar in which when you look at, you feel responsible or accountable to, like, okay, now I got to keep going. And so, the athlete, they seed in you a certain level of power if they're smart, which inadvertently they do, I'll call it their own bill comes into play.
The first set of results, it's like some sort of result, you get is like, okay, so follow the plan, trust the plan. And I say, just trust the plan the first time, get out there, find out what result. They get the result, they get a positive result. They're there for life. They even might have bad races after that for some reason or another. They'll still come back because they remember that first race. I tell everybody the same thing. The first distance, the first time you do a distance, and especially I get a lot of bucket listers, right? Oh, I bucket list to do a marathon, and they come see me in September so they can run the Disney marathon in January. And they just want to get through it, right? That's all they want to do. They want to say that they ran a marathon. And I'm always like, okay, first time you do a distance, you do it for fun. You take all the pressure out and you go how your legs will take you. I'll get you the endurance and I will get you to the best that you can possibly be in that 4 months. But when you get there, I want you to have a great time. The first time, enjoy. And the Walt Disney World Marathon, you don't really go there to PR because it's huge. There's 25,000 people. And if you're anywhere but the first 2 corrals, you're stuck behind a ton of people. But every so often, there's a place to stop and take pictures with characters. And then you're at Animal Kingdom and they bring out real live animals out there. So it's not really there to PR. So that's why I like that race, because especially for first timers. But you always say that, but it sticks in their head at that point. They're like, oh, I did it and I got through it and it was fun. So then you could start adding time goals and stuff. And even if they have a bad race after that, they remember the first one. The first one always sticks. And I think that's that mindset that you keep talking about as far as, what you eat before the race is more about your psychological. Because we know it takes 48, even if they're not doing ketosis, if they're not in ketosis, it still takes 48 hours for you to, it takes up to 48 hours to fill your glycogen stores. So most likely you're still working on dinner either 2 nights before or maybe breakfast the morning before. That's when you finally filled up all your glycogen stores. And then we use things to top off the glycogen stores, but like goos and stuff, which that's a question that we can talk about too. But I want to go into some myths because and getting a scientific point of view. So working on the keto diet or the carnivore diet. Can we compare and contrast both of those? They're close.
Yeah. So, I mean, the carnivore diet, I think, is very interesting. It's very interesting because my hepatology or liver textbooks don't really have a chapter in which say, hey, if you eat only meat, what happens to your health? And I mean, the case studies are in. It's unbelievable how it's transformed people's health, where you'd think it'd be terrible, but they're kicking medications they've been on for 20 years. Their blood pressure is coming back to normal. People that are even on antipsychotics and mental health have never been better. So there's something very unbelievable from the carnivore diet side of things. Some people that tried it, like, oh, I got constipated and I stopped after about 6 days. Another guy that tries it says, well, I had explosive diarrhea for 2 weeks before I was okay. So you'll see that very often in biology where it's either, hey, I am constipated or I have diarrhea. And that goes back to just the fact that anywhere within our pathway, what we have is inhibitor, activator. And you don't know sometimes when what's out of line or what's being compensated. So you might see a very opposite effect. But the fact that it's still in the same region or area is a good sign that there is something really happening. And so the carnivore diet will make it so that your insulin is very low when you're eating the food. And the meat has the vast majority of what you need in terms of dietary requirements. And so you will be very quick to lose a lot of weight, a lot of fat. And you will be in a state of, I would say, pretty good place to do performance. As it kind of goes to saying endurance races, now I have never worked with anyone individually that's done both endurance and the carnivore diet at the same time. My guess is you'd have to go slow and steady because it's going to be difficult to eat that much meat in order to be able to sustain very high outputs of endurance training. And you would have to really do a great job of making it easy to prepare a lot of these meats. So I would think like stew-like preparations in which the assimilation of the meat's super easy because, again, you have to expend a lot of enzymes to digest your meat. So that would be my kind of take from the carnivore side of things, where I wouldn't rule it out as like, oh, you can't do this. Slow and steady. And, if they come to you like, hey, coach, I'm trying something new, can you work with me? And then you'd be like, okay, well, let's see what you got and let's see what you can showcase. Because that's also the interesting thing is you show me what's possible. You think it's possible, go ahead, you do it, and we'll work together and we'll see where we get to. Keto is, I'm notorious for never liking when people tell me what diet they're on because it still doesn't tell me what you're eating. Right. Are you eating eggs and avocado every single day? Because those two in combination have a very heavy digestion requirement. And you're better off, for example, eating your avocado with a boatload of other fats. And then you're better off eating your proteins with a boatload of other proteins, separating those out almost two different meals, so to speak, or just preparing it in a different way altogether, right? That's why guacamole is actually so good because you're taking things that help ease the absorption of the avocado and the emulsification and everything else because you're putting in the lime, and other things in there, right? So keto is, again, you'd have to specify what am I eating because you can eat a whole bowl of processed garbage that's terrible for you. And you're like, well, I'm on keto diet. Yeah, but you're just eating food in which you can't even access the nutrients to. So often when people think keto, it's heavy meat eating like low carb vegetables. The difference between keto and carnivore could be non-existent because you can say, hey, I'm doing keto, which is the other way of saying I'm eating a lot of meat. I just cut off all the vegetables. Or, it can be vegetarian too. You can go fully veggie and still be in keto. Obviously harder though. I don't necessarily think that you have to be 100% keto all the time in order to get the benefits of keto because you can, for example, eat one carbohydrate-rich meal at, let's say, on Monday in the evening at 6 and then not have any carbs the next day. And by the morning, by 10 o'clock in the morning, you'll already have entered ketosis and you just don't have very high carbs. You can have 30 maybe grams of carbs and it won't kick you out of ketosis and you'll be ketosis for the rest of the day. So, I know intermittent fasting is a big, buzzword and fad, But I would just
That was my next myth.
Yeah. So I would just say intermittent fasting is it should be more just considered like default biology. It's just the way that you're supposed to respect your liver and your blood cleaning process. Because when you eat, you turn on digestion and it lasts from 4 to 6 hours. During that time, your liver can't detox your blood at the same rate, at the same level. So the first thing you're doing in the morning is you're eating like a heavy nutrient-rich meal. That's great, but you've delayed detoxification. And so your liver is going to hold on to that. So the best thing you can do in the morning is give something like lemon water, give something like, like a cucumber or whatever, something very simple that has they act like scavengers or transport so that your liver can throw its detoxification contents from the night before onto the little bits of lemon, little bits of cucumber. They go into your colon and they go out. And then you can have calories after that, like the egg and the nutrients, and you're not delaying your detoxification, or you're not holding on to what you're trying to clean your blood with. And so anybody that's eating 3 meals a day will start having problems. A lot of the young athletes specifically, I thought you shouldn't eat your breakfast because I can see you're they're in my training camps and they can barely put food in their mouth. They get acne all the time. And so I'm like, okay, just drink boatloads of water. You're thirsty. And we're going to put stuff in your water so it's hydrating. So you're not just peeing it out right away. And then eat your meal when you're really hungry. And you'll see how when it's time for the kids to eat, oh man, do they have a massive meal. And they'll eat right after practice, right? They skip the morning meal. Some kids will still eat because whatever, they're okay to eat. But, as soon as practice finishes, like their plate is gigantic. And then, same thing for the evening where they'll eat a big meal. So, the myth of like, you got to eat all the time to gain weight, that's not true. That's quite the like very nuanced scenario that some people should be eating all the time. Usually when you have like an acidic issue or you have some very specific case, would I advise you to eat all the time because you're not allowing other systems to come online if you're constantly eating, constantly snacking. And what you want to be strong resilience. And think about endurance training. There's 2 types of things that endurance trainers have to consider. They have to consider training in a fastest state to help them adapt with your energies. They also have to train in a gluttonous state. So leaving the door and eating food, because if you're doing a very high amount of exercise, you need to refeed while you're still in motion. And we're not designed to do that. You're not designed to move and to digest. And so the free will to do that, very uncomfortable, very difficult, and you should train it, right? It's why bananas are a great option when people on marathons. It's not there because bananas is sponsoring it. It's because banana is like an alien food designed for the human being because it's so complete, so easily accessible, and so quickly transferable into us continuing, let's say, movement. So, there's a lot to say within this area of like, okay, keto, carnivore, intermittent fasting, where I'd say intermittent fasting is really something for everyone to consider as you need a better word for it, because this isn't fasting. Fasting would be, I eat once a day, I have 24-hour fast, I'm all on your tablets. You eating twice a day with a respectful break between is how your physiology functions. And the moment that you get back to a healthy baseline and respect with food, you'll see how when you start eating at odd bits in the day, you'll ruin your appetite. Like, oh, I had a little bit of nuts or whatnot, a couple snacks, now it's time to eat, but like, I don't want to eat right now. And then 3 hours goes by, then you're like starving at 9 o'clock. Okay, give me all this food. And you go to sleep at 11. And then your liver is all sluggish, interrupts your sleep. And you're just now always this is the circadian rhythm. You're not in a rhythm with your biology. And you can't go off of what some guy's, telling you on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, because he might have well set himself up to adapt slowly to that lifestyle, whatever it is. I know I've heard like, it doesn't matter when you eat, so long as you fast for 16 hours, you can have pasta at 12 o'clock at night. Okay. No, let's stop this. And let's just bring it back to something very simple, is that we are not designed to be so feeble and dependent on food. So I would say this again. Remember, when I eat food, there's a massive pleasure response to food. And so this is when I said psychology, this is really what I'm referring to, is that pleasure response won't get me to a state where I'm going to inhibit access to my energy resources because I didn't have this pleasure response. But I can also train out of that. I can train myself saying, okay, you know what? I won't have the food. I'll have a fasted state. I'll exercise. It'll be a terrible training session. I'm going to go to sleep because I'll be fatigued. And then when I wake up, I'll drink water and I'll go again. I'm going to have good positive self-talk. And I'm going to go to exercises that I like the deadlift, for example. I like doing deadlift. Deadlifts are fun. And lo and behold, all of a sudden I'm doing a personal best, on a day 3 of a fast. What's going on here? Where did I mess up, or what belief did I have beforehand in which thought I can't have access to my energy? You have to have access to your energy stores, and you can slowly inhibit or you can accelerate how you can get access to those stores. And remember, fatigue is a self-preservation process. It's an important process. So you, as the consciousness, don't push past the body's physical limits. So fatigue's set in place. Be like, no, you power down for now. But it's put at 20 or 40% of the capacity. 40% would be nice, just to consider. But that'd be nice if you can get to 40%. So once you start training into this state, really what happens is you become a lot more resilient. You become a lot stronger, and your organs start adapting. So anyone that does endurance training, what you see is their heart will become more efficient pump. But the person that has bad nutritional, bad dietary habits, your pump will never become as efficient as someone that has phenomenal dietary and nutritional, and call this incorporation of science. Because they're not reliant, for example, I have to eat in order to be able to perform. Just slowly go into this, focus on my breathing. I just have to get to 20K. There's no particular time to hit. He just said, do it in a fasted state. Okay, I have plenty of water. My stomach's full of water. I'm okay. Hey, I got to pee in the middle of the race. That's okay. He said I could do that. We're hiking. This notion is that you're going to become a lot more resilient. And when you're doing so, it's the same idea with our plants and fertilizers. When you give an insane amount of fertilizer to plants, the plant becomes very bad at taking in nutrients. Now, it's going to grow and have a high yield, but the moment you put that plant in a average or low nutrients, it'll die. It won't survive. And it's the same thing as you. If you constantly keep giving yourself such high abundance of food, where a portion of it's passing through you constantly, you're peeing out your vitamins, you're peeing out your supplements, you're defecating out food you're trying to ingest, your fats you're trying to ingest. When you fast yourself, when you get hungry, oh man, digestion won't be an issue. You will burn through that food like no tomorrow. And I know everyone's gone through those training sessions where they don't care anything about anything else. And it's usually, there's this myth of you have a 20-minute eating window. That's not really the case. It's because, as you alluded to, there is a depletion access to glycogen. There's a depletion access to both liver fat and adipose fat, and just a little more complicated, intramuscular fat that is all being at a play in a tug. So, when we have something in which we're thinking, okay, it's replenished my glycogen stores, it's very likely the glycogen stores don't need any replenishing. They're often at such capacity in which, unless it's like your guys, I'm talking about the average individual, but your guys, that are training on a regular basis, they're going to go to a point where every practice, yes, they're going to access their glycogen stores. But the average day individual, they're eating so often that their glycogen stores are at capacity, and they're constantly getting influx, in which now they're storing it as fat. If, for example, you have extremely high fat metabolism, someone's very well trained, and you have a very easy session for them, their glycogen stores are barely touched. They touch their blood supply of resources, and especially if it was a low tempo practice, or just, let's say, a stamina practice. Steady state. Yeah. Their liver glycogen might barely move. If you were to take a look in a biopsy at it. And obviously it depends, volume, training status, and all this other stuff. But it's to understand that we have the resources on us. And the better you are an athlete, the top athletes have very good efficiency at the biomechanics. Their techniques is great, but they have very good efficiency at being able to utilize these energy substrates at the appropriate time, and then using all available, from muscle glycogen to intramuscular fat within the muscle, within the blood supply. There's a ton of resources in the actual blood supply in terms of amino acids and fats and ketones if you're in that state, and then glucose, obviously. And then you have the liver as this massive resource that can supply all of them. And then the fat storage, which we haven't talked about. So, the access to energy stores is absolutely everything when it comes to, this high performance, even just, I would say, performance. No matter what level, just for you to be able to excel at that level, it's this biology that's at play, and you're going to stumble into this bit regardless of who you are. And the more you have sort of support or interest around it, the more you can start playing within the confines of what we're talking about, And so that would be my like very long-winded answer between keto and carnivore.
No, are you kidding? That's fantastic. And I even learned a bunch of things that you just mentioned. So it was interesting that you were talking about, in the fasted state, you're learning to what to take in and, that you don't need to yet. A lot of it is already there for you. You just need to learn how to access it. Very interesting because they got that case study. So around here, because we're in a very high humidity climate, everybody around here, all the runners, they usually have belts or they have where I could put a water bottle back here. There's people that have bladders and the whole bit, and they're all out there. We've got this one loop. It's 10 miles. And then all it's got like 3 water fountains. I never carried anything. And all my runner friends was like, you're not carrying water. You're not carrying electrolytes above. And I'm like, it's 10 miles. It's fine. Because my body learned that I could work on just water. And I only needed those 3 stops, and they were almost like 3 miles in between. Right. So it was like, I knew that my body learned that I didn't need the salt for 10 miles. I didn't need the electrolytes, that I just needed enough water to wet my whistle. And who knows if I need it? That might have been a psychological thing where my mouth just needed to be watered down a little bit. I did start that way. I started with always carrying the belt and blah, blah, blah. For 6 miles, I would have the belt and the goose and everything. And now it's like carry anything for 10 miles. And I've done 8-minute miles for 10 miles as just a training run without an issue. But I recognize that from what you were talking about, that it is a psychological thing that was going to help you. Same thing, like you said, that people have the bagel and the peanut butter. It's more the taste, and that's what they've done. So that's what they're going to put in their mouth. Yeah, the taste.
There's a certain, let's say, a caliber that they'll always offer at. So if I constantly need to use a gel pack to get through 40 kilometers or marathons,
26.2 miles.
So I do think within that range for the average individual, they can easily train with it to be able to go without any bit of, call it, additional food supply. If you are at a state where you must consume something in order to get to there, you're pretty much saying, hey, body, don't access fat anymore. Here's some more sugar. And you're interfering with your body adapting to be able to function with its resources, which is in the long run going to handicap you and keep you at a certain level while there's going to be another echelon or group that's going to operate a level above. This is where you're going to see these sort of like brackets of individuals where they're not in the same ballpark or league. And that's why I said belief at the beginning was one of the big challenges in the health side of things, where we put that sort of limitation that we have for ourselves. Oh, I can't do this without it. And you do often need someone you really trust and have support there, whether it's a coach, whether it's a loved one, to help you realize like, hey, maybe this is not the best thing. Can you try and push past it? Push past the discomfort. And then once you've adapted, you turn on your superpowers. And then there is a certain level for ultra marathon in particular, where it's just not biochemically feasible without you consuming food. And I do think that's past, when you started going into the 80, 100 kilometers, multi-day races, there's no chance that you're going to be able to use just the energy reserve that in your body. You need to constantly, find easy ways to incorporate. And that's what I was talking about, the gluttonous training, when you have these Ironmans that are, 10-hour races, right? That's a different ball game. And for those guys, I don't recommend them going without it. But I'll say,
well, no, I've done 5 of them.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I've done 5 of them. And yeah, no. And that's where, very interesting that you say that, because it is they've got a saying, right? And you talk about being gluttonous. So basically it's swim, bike, run. And they call, all right, the bike's a smorgasbord.
Mm-hmm.
So basically you're constantly eating on the bike because of 2 reasons. Well, first of all, you're on a bike, so you're on a steady surface. Your body is not like, trembling up and down, so you can kind of get into your digestive without it feeling like you're overrunning it. But you're coming off the swim, so you burnt 2.4 miles on the swim, and you come off of that, and you've had your meals and stuff before then. So you come off the swim, and obviously you can't eat during the swim. So that's not going to work. But so you've got to go on the bike. You've got to replenish for what you lost in the swim. You've got to maintain fuel for what's on the bike. And then you've got to get ready and prepare your body for the run. So that is the reason why they say, okay, the bike's a smorgasbord. So you might eat 1,000 to 2,000 calories on a bike. for what you've lost, what you need to finish the bike. And then you're going into a pretty big run at that point.
What's your preferred calorie source for the bike?
I am big on, I like gels and bananas. So I use a Morton gel, which is basically fruit. It's a combination of sugars, fructose, dextrose. And I think it's something else. It tastes like sugar water.
Mm-hmm.
It really is a gel going down in. And that was the other thing, is that there's all these myths. Right? So they've got these other gels and they say that they're about 20 grams of carbs. And they're like, take one every 45 minutes. And that used to be the standard.
Right? Yeah, I remember.
And then I recently, in a triathlon state, I'm like, no, 90 grams an hour. Game changer, complete game changer. Now, because I'm not in a ketosis state. I haven't transferred and learned to use those extra energy stores. But at 90 grams an hour, it was game changing. When I started to feel fatigued before, all of a sudden it's like, nope, I can keep going. It was an amazing feeling.
Right, the biking window.
Some of the gel packs and stuff will have it. Like there's one, the fatty acid is that starts more of that, less on glucose, higher on like kind of starchy fatty acids instead. Slow fats to just instead of, and then you don't have as much. There's not nearly, you don't have to take as much. Like when I take 90 grams of carbs, you're taking one gel. And for the people that have done that transfer, they're fine and they're good. Yeah. The other story was I had talked to a woman who had taken her family raw, complete raw, right? Obviously not. They're also vegan. Well, I don't know what's vegan. So, but raw, completely raw. And she was telling me that her kid loved to ski. When they would go skiing, his friends every couple hours would be starving. They'd have to go down to the lounge and get a hamburger and fries, blah, blah, blah. And he would just bring a couple oranges and he'd be fine.
So that's how human beings supposed to be. I'm just going to say that that's how we're supposed to be. We're not supposed to be this, like, call it chain to, the next meal within the next 4 to 6 hours. That's a good indicator that you have dysregulated hormones and that you're very likely overeating, or that the food that you're eating is missing nutrition. And so this is something in which it's pretty basic, but calories are not a very good concept for nutrition. For sure, there's no such thing as calories of food. Calories come from the notion of a bomb calorimeter, right? So you can put anything in a bomb calorimeter, see how many calories are present in there, meaning, how many degrees do I change water up in order to be able to use this unit? So when you're eating food, can we get to the idea of what we're trying to label as a calorie, which is what we call macronutrients? Why do we call these one specific a macronutrient? Carbs, fats, and proteins is because they can go into what we call the energy cycle, where we actually transfer that into the energy currency for the cell, right? So fats don't belong in this category, and proteins are really used for the energy cycle. So really now what we're left with is, we started with this idea of calories, and now we finally got to a point where we're talking about what we're actually using in terms of biochemistry. So this is like calories is a terrible notion because your fingernails have calories. You're not going to get any nutrition out of it. Canned tuna has calories, but you're very unlikely to get any bit of that nutrition in you like you think you're going to get, because not every single can, obviously, but the vast majority of that protein has been clumped up in such a way that your enzymes have an insanely difficult time getting at it. It's kind of akin to cooking food in a certain way in which you denature the protein to such an extent, and you've wrapped it up in this, little matrix of food in which your enzymes just don't get to it. But that's telling you that you weren't able to get to digesting all. And so the notion of calories, it's in there, but you didn't have the enzymes to break it down to absorb it. So did you get the calories that you ate that you think you did? But what we're talking about is these three big macronutrients. And the reason I see fats don't belong there is because the class of molecules that we call fat is just too big. It's too important. It's doing too many processes. And only a small fraction of what you call fat is actually being used for energy. Because keep in mind, every single one of your cells is just fat and a little bit of protein, right? And it's filled with water. That's what your cells are. Think of a brain. What is it? It's just entirely fat. So, for example, you eat your omegas, omega-3, 6, and 9. So you need all of those in order to build out your brain. You're not using those for energy, that you can in certain circumstances. But for example, omega-3, your body is going to spare all the omega-3 for the composition of your body. So you eat nutrition for the calories, the macronutrients, for energy today. You eat food because you want it for composition. I'm going to be this thing. This is making up my cell membrane. This is making up my protein. And so you don't want to have bad drywalling in the house where it's going to let a bunch of water and mold through. You don't want to have bad fatty acids in your membranes because they're not going to be able to do the signaling and the function of life in which you get to experience vitality, vigor, bliss. You won't get that because they're filled with holes. So a trans fat getting into your membranes, bad news. It's not going to be able to do the processes of life. It's going to clog things up that cause problems. The same idea when you need good amounts of omega-3s and omega-6s to be part of your membranes and you don't have them, it's going to be consequential because now the process is necessary for you to be able to have fast reactions, learning, memory, or this all going to take a hit, focus, sleeping. And so that's what you need the nutrients for, so you're undergoing a higher amount of recovery all the time when you're being an athlete. You're becoming back stronger and stronger. So you need to regulate your immune system. So your immune system does the job it's supposed to do. How you regulate it? Well, you make things called prostaglandins and you make these molecules that help you coordinate these responses. What are they made from? Well, they're made from the food that you eat.
Oh my God, you really are what you eat.
You 100% you are what you eat. And the importance of it is high. And adaptation is a real thing, and which is still is a massive curve and a wrench in a lot of science and biology. And you get all these sort of different ideas. But like I said, people have adapted to a keto diet, fasted for certain days, done, record lifts or deadlift that are unbelievable. It really showcases to you that you should take matters into your own hands and work with people around you to achieve something special, right? And so I've had people throughout my life come with these ideas like, oh, can I try this? Should I do this? And I give them the best I can where I'd say ready evidence or, as acting as a nexus point information where what people would see, what people are having with what they're doing. And to give them, call it the safety net of, risk of what they might encounter, but to also showcase, like I've learned through people what's possible in biology where if they didn't do it, I would still be I don't know. But because they did it, now I'm like, okay, so you can adapt to that. How did they get there? Well, it looks like they were born for it, because of their life, their circumstances, or they were in the military and they're forced, right? So a lot of the people that showcase some of the most interesting biology are often the ones that are putting themselves in extreme scenarios. And athletes are actually part of that. Copenhagen, so Denmark and Norway, are two of the biggest publishers for exercise physiology. And to me, that's been a game changer for health and wellness because the disease portion of our understanding of biology is super easy. Because when there's something wrong, something's out of range, the association is no problem. And when you go to the medical institutes, it's very easy for us to point, hey, this is an issue. It's not very easy for us to be like, hey, you're doing way better than the average individual. But that's what exercise physiology, that's what people push themselves up besides these comfort zones has really shown us and teach us about health, longevity, and really what that means at the molecular level so that someone can lie to you all the time through their words, but through their actions, they're always going to show the truth. And through their actions, they're going to be their physiology, their heart rate, their ventilatory capacity, their VO2 max, everything kind of showcases, hey, this is what the actual outcomes of my actions were. And now we can use that to be like, oh, you're going to do very well in life or you're not going to do very well in life. And to just reiterate how complicated the blood portion is that I have someone that's 91. They have Alzheimer's. They have dementia. They're not doing that great on the cognitive side of things. They have good days. They have bad days. They're very happy though. They don't have too much complications. They're quite easy to deal with. And their blood looks like they're 180. Their blood looks like someone would have died, unbelievable. Everything's off. Everything's red. You're just like, how's the liver functioning? And yes, he's on quite a few meds, but his lung capacity is phenomenal. So it's interesting to say where, we get these blood tests and we use them. They're very useful, but there's so many hard to understand scenarios and you really have to take in as much information you possibly can with who's in front of you, who you're dealing with, and
right, exactly.
And be curious, right? That's why I say be curious, try to understand as much as you possibly can. And that will only, be a benefit for you when you're trying to make, call it helpful, big changes, right? Where one time you might try one thing and like you said, hey, I switched the timing or how much I was consuming and I got a way bigger result. You got to be brave and not courageous enough to be able to fail in order to be able to get called the glory too when you succeed, right? And it feels good when you have an idea, like, you're talking about, and then you do something and you really reaffirm that, right? That's what we live for, right? That's the real high that's worth the chase.
I'm like that mad scientist. So I'll do the research, I'll read stuff, and then I'll be like, this is interesting. And then I'll try it on myself. And depending on the results, then the first thing will happen is I'll go to a client and I'll be like, I need you to be my guinea pig just for the next training block. Okay, I want you to try this, this, and this. And I've got a certain set of clients that I know that I can go to. I've got like 3 guys that will do it. And I've got a couple of women that will, when I give it to them, they will take it and run with it. Like just recently, one of the women that I had, she is a lawyer. So her diet fluctuates because she's got to take clients out and, a whole bit. So recently we went to a point where about a few months ago, I said, okay, listen, I want you to prioritize protein. I want you to get 1 gram per body pound per day, no matter what. First of all, she said that she was more satiated during the day. So that was good. So that made me happy. But all of a sudden, she was recovering faster. She was progressing more. Everything got better for her, right? Everything got better. Times are faster. She's able to last longer. She's not taking as much of nutrients and carbs during her runs as she was before. Just by this one small little thing, she said, prioritize protein. And then whatever else you want to eat, fine. Because she was more satiated, she didn't eat as much as the other stuff. So that worked out, plus all the other stuff. But then I have got another guy that didn't work out as well. Of course, there's obviously changes in people's behavior and things going on. I can't be 100% accountable for what he ate or what he did. But there are times that it didn't work or it didn't work as well. That comes to your interpersonal, what you called it,
inter-individual
variation. So that's perfect. You and I could talk about this stuff forever. I have more questions, and I think we're going to have to just have a part 2 and a part 3 and a part 5 on this because I've got definite. So Daniel has a company called Timeline Sciences, and you need to see this website, ladies and gentlemen. And, it's not all about Daniel. This is about his services, health coaching, scientific consulting, longevity, performance, metabolic health. He's got all this stuff going on, and you need to and then there's a place for you to book a one-on-one call with him. Again, this is timelinesciences.com, and you definitely need to check that out and look at that. He has brought it down to 3 different social networks. He's only on X, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I learned
only on X. I'm terrible with the other 2. I'm a scientist, not a social media guy.
All right. So got it right from Daniel's mouth, right? So he's going to be mostly on X, and we'll give you that link to his profile there so you can jump into his DMs and his spaces and get questions answered. What are you working on?
Myself, the biggest thing I work on is cold exposure. That's what I've been doing for quite a long time. I am not doing any real big competitions. There's just too many projects I put myself in, which is now the priority to build a family too at the same time. Got a wife recently, so that was a big milestone.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I swim with my dog pretty recreationally in the ocean. So our ocean's pretty cold here. And so, as the season warms, I'll go from what I do now about 5 minutes in the water to about 10, 15, just as it gets a little warmer and warmer. I appreciate the shout out. More than happy to come back and talk a lot more biology, performance, health, energy systems, models, science. I do think it is absolutely imperative that the conversations around science are public and up for debate, that we don't trust the science.
Yeah. And next time, so this is the kind of get to know us, regular episode, but I will put episodes with agendas on there where we will literally just talk about energy systems, and maybe we'll talk about case studies and different things that to give people. That's the biggest gift that I'm trying to give everybody that listens and watches or listens, Life Changing Challengers, is the fact that everybody gives a little nugget somewhere. So I'm always like, hey, listen, if you've learned one thing, I've done my job. One thing that you can take back and level up, either if it's a, if you're into health and fitness, or if you're into, mental wellness or into entrepreneurial adventures, somewhere down the line, one of these episodes every episode is going to give you something to think about to level up your light and increase your potential. And that's what I want to bring. That's the whole reason for life-changing challenges, because that's exactly what it is. But so I'm excited. You fixed yourself, your gastrointestinal and I don't know about your allergies. We'll definitely talk about that, but you're delving into the science of it. So Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. If you are watching this on YouTube, please go ahead and hit that like and that subscribe button, hit the bell so you always know when we drop a new episode. If you're watching or listening on Apple or Spotify, hey, drop us a quick review. You know what? And I don't even care if it's a bad review, because anything kind of feedback you give me is just going to help me evolve the podcast. So the next time you listen, you're going to just love it that much more. So again, thank you so much for listening. Daniel, again, we really appreciate you joining us. So for Daniel and myself, we will see you in the next one.
Well, that wraps up another episode of Life-Changing Challengers. I'm your host, Brad Minus, saying thank you for joining us on this journey of transformation. If today's stories inspired you, please take a moment to review, share, and follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Your support helps us reach more listeners and create an even bigger impact. Remember, every challenge is a chance to grow. Until next time, keep pushing, keep challenging, and never stop pursuing your extraordinary.